He pulled her from a burning car, unaware she'd been searching for him for years. The sky transformed from steel gray to obsidian as Elena Reyes hurriedly gathered her research equipment on the rocky shoreline. Her data collection on coastal erosion rates had kept her too absorbed to notice the rapidly changing weather. The first fat raindrops hit her clipboard, smearing her careful notes as the wind whipped her dark hair across her face. "Not now," she muttered, struggling to pack delicate measuring instruments into her waterproof case. The research grant had barely covered the equipment, and she couldn't afford replacements. Her supervisor at the university would be furious if she damaged anything. Elena glanced up at the churning ocean, waves already crashing higher against the jagged rocks. The weather report had predicted only light rain, nothing like the storm front clearly moving in. The narrow path back to her rental car was already becoming treacherous as water slicked the stones. A crack of lightning illuminated the landscape, followed almost immediately by thunder that she felt in her bones. Too close. She needed shelter, fast. Through the thickening rain, she spotted the lighthouse standing sentinel on the rocky peninsula. It was supposed to be automated these days, no keeper required, but she'd seen smoke from its chimney earlier. Someone was there. Elena slung her heavy pack over her shoulder and began picking her way toward the lighthouse, each step more dangerous than the last as the wind threatened to topple her. The tide was rising faster than normal, swallowing the lower sections of the path. Another lightning strike, closer this time. Elena stumbled, her foot slipping on wet stone. She felt herself falling, braced for impact, but instead of rock, she hit freezing water. The shock of it stole her breath as the current immediately dragged at her legs, pulling her toward deeper water. "Help!" she screamed, but her voice disappeared into the howling wind. Her waterlogged pack was dragging her down, and her fingers scrabbled uselessly against slick stone. Elena fought against rising panic, trying to remember her water safety training, but the cold was already numbing her limbs. A figure appeared at the edge of her vision, tall, wearing a heavy raincoat. She caught a glimpse of a weathered face, eyes narrowed against the storm. "Take my hand," the man shouted, extending a rope in her direction. Elena lunged for it, missing on the first try as a wave pushed her further from shore. On the second attempt, her fingers closed around rough hemp. The man braced himself against a boulder and slowly pulled her toward safety, fighting against the current that seemed determined to claim her. When she finally collapsed on solid ground, her entire body shook uncontrollably. Without a word, the man helped her to her feet and guided her toward the lighthouse, one strong arm supporting her weight. Inside, warmth enveloped Elena like an embrace. A fire crackled in a small stone hearth, and the man quickly wrapped a wool blanket around her shoulders. "You need dry clothes," he said, his voice quiet yet carrying a natural authority. "I'll find something." Elena nodded gratefully, taking in his appearance as he moved around the circular room. Tall and lean, with salt and pepper hair cropped short, he moved with the easy grace of someone accustomed to finding balance on shifting ground. His face bore the lines of someone who'd spent decades facing the elements. He returned with simple clothes, flannel shirt, wool socks, canvas pants with a drawstring waist, and gestured toward a small bathroom. "These should work. There's a shower if you need it." "Thank you," Elena managed through chattering teeth. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here." Something flickered across his expression, pain, perhaps, or memory. "The lighthouse is always here," he said simply. "That's the point." After a scalding shower and change into the too large but blessedly dry clothes, Elena emerged to find a steaming mug waiting on a small table. "Tea with honey," the man said. "Good for shock." "I'm Elena," she offered, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "Elena Reyes." "Malcolm Chen," he replied. "Looks like you'll be staying a while. Storm's getting worse." As if confirming his words, wind howled around the lighthouse, rattling the windows. Elena sipped her tea, feeling strength returning to her limbs. "I thought these lighthouses were all automated now," she ventured. Malcolm's eyes, dark and thoughtful, studied her. They are. I maintain the equipment. The Coast Guard lets me live here in exchange. Elena nodded, noting the sparse but comfortable furnishings. Books lined the walls, and a half-finished model ship sat on a workbench near the window. This wasn't temporary housing, this was someone's home. You saved my life out there, she said softly. Thank you. Malcolm's gaze shifted to the window, where rain lashed against the glass. Just doing what needs doing. You should rest. Bedroom's upstairs if you want privacy. I'll be here keeping watch. As Elena climbed the narrow spiral staircase to the offered room, she couldn't shake the feeling that Malcolm Chen was a man who carried more stories than the lighthouse itself, and just as many warnings. 3 days after her rescue, Elena found herself still at the lighthouse. The storm had been worse than predicted, washing out the coastal road and leaving her effectively stranded. Though she'd called her department head to explain the situation, her unexpected extended stay was proving unexpectedly illuminating. Malcolm Chen was a man of precise routines. Each morning he checked the lighthouse equipment, meticulously recording readings in a leather-bound logbook. Afternoons were spent on maintenance, both of the lighthouse and the grounds surrounding it. What fascinated Elena most were the evenings, when Malcolm would retreat to a small workshop attached to the main building. May I? She asked on the 4th evening, standing at the workshop doorway. Malcolm looked up from his workbench, his expression unreadable. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. Elena stepped inside, immediately captivated by what she saw. The walls were lined with shelves displaying intricate sculptures made entirely of sea glass, pieces of broken bottles and discarded objects transformed by years in the ocean into smooth, frosted treasures. These are extraordinary, she breathed, approaching a particularly striking piece, a mermaid emerging from waves, crafted from blues and greens with such detail that it seemed almost fluid. Malcolm continued working, his hands never pausing as they sorted through a collection of glass fragments. The sea returns what we discard, transformed. Elena picked up a small lighthouse sculpture, noting the precision of the tiny staircase visible through miniature windows. How long have you been creating these? 23 years, he answered, his tone matter-of-fact. Since I left the Coast Guard. This was the first personal detail he'd volunteered since her arrival. Elena treaded carefully. You were in the Coast Guard? Malcolm's hand stilled momentarily. Search and rescue. Until I wasn't. The silence that followed held weight. Elena recognized the boundaries being drawn and respected them, turning her attention back to the sculptures. The lighthouse has always been a powerful symbol, she offered instead. A guide home in darkness. Something in Malcolm's posture relaxed slightly. Not always effective, though. Some ships still crash against the rocks. But many more find their way safely because of it, Elena countered. Malcolm's eyes met hers, evaluating. You're an optimist, Dr. Reyes. Elena, she corrected automatically. And I'm a scientist. I believe in evidence. For every shipwreck story, statistics show hundreds of safe passages. A faint smile touched Malcolm's lips. Statistics weren't much comfort to those who went down. Later that evening, as they shared a simple dinner of fish stew, Elena found Malcolm more forthcoming. Perhaps it was the gentle rhythm of rain on the lighthouse windows, or perhaps her genuine interest in his art had earned a measure of trust. The Crestview went down during my watch, he said suddenly, setting down his spoon. November 17, 2001. 8 crew members aboard. Elena felt the weight of those words, understanding immediately this was the pivotal moment, the reason he now lived alone in an automated lighthouse making sculptures from broken things. How many survived? She asked softly. 5, Malcolm replied, eyes fixed on some middle distance. Should have been all 8. You were there. Malcolm nodded once. Worst storm I'd seen in 15 years of service. Waves 40 feet high, winds at hurricane force. We got the mayday at 3:17 a.m. Captain decided to respond despite conditions. I was first diver in the water. Elena didn't press when he fell silent again. She simply waited, understanding that some stories needed space to unfold. I found the first 2 crew members trapped in the galley. Got them out, passed them to the rescue basket. Third man was unconscious but breathing. Fourth had a broken leg. Malcolm's voice remained steady, reciting facts rather than emotions. The fifth, the ship's cook, was pinned under fallen equipment. By the time I freed him, the ship was breaking apart. The captain called us back. But there were still 3 people aboard, Elena said, already knowing the answer. I argued to go back down. Captain refused, said the ship was going under and we'd lose everyone if we tried. Malcolm's fingers tightened around his water glass. He was right. The Crestview sank completely 4 minutes later. Elena reached across the table, her hand covering his weathered one. You saved 5 people who would have died without you. Malcolm withdrew his hand gently. I hear them sometimes. The 3 we left behind. Especially during storms. That night, Elena lay awake listening to the fading rain and the distant sound of Malcolm's footsteps as he paced the lighthouse tower. She understood now why he kept this lonely vigil, maintaining a light that could never reach those already lost. The road was finally clear enough for travel, but Elena found herself reluctant to leave. She'd called her department to request an extension of her field research, citing the rich data the storm had provided for her coastal erosion study. It wasn't entirely untrue, the storm had dramatically altered several of her study sites, but it wasn't the whole truth either. I can drive you to town tomorrow, Malcolm offered as they walked along the shoreline, collecting sea glass that had washed up during the storm. You must be eager to get back to proper accommodations. Elena bent to retrieve a piece of cobalt blue glass, worn smooth by years in the sea. Actually, I was hoping I might stay a bit longer. The storm created some fascinating erosion patterns I'd like to document. Malcolm glanced at her, his expression guarded but not unwelcoming. The lighthouse isn't exactly equipped for guests. I don't need much, she countered. And I could help with maintenance. I'm handy with tools. A week later, they had settled into an unexpectedly comfortable routine. Malcolm continued his lighthouse duties while Elena divided her time between research and assisting with repairs around the property. In the evenings, she would work on her laptop while Malcolm crafted his sea glass art. The silence between them had evolved from awkward to companionable. When a package arrived from her mother, Elena was surprised to find her grandmother's old journal among the items sent. A note explained that her mother had been clearing out the attic and thought Elena might want this piece of family history while she was studying the same coast Abuela loved. That night, Elena curled up with the leather-bound book, tracing her fingers over her grandmother's elegant handwriting. Marisol Reyes had been a force of nature, a Mexican immigrant who became a respected marine biologist in the 1960s when both her gender and heritage presented significant barriers. The journal detailed Marisol's early research years along this very coastline. Elena smiled at her grandmother's passionate descriptions of tide pool ecosystems and her frustrated accounts of dealing with dismissive male colleagues. She was about to set the journal aside when a particular entry caught her eye. June 12, 1979, found a boy nearly drowned today at Heron Cove. Chinese American, about 8 years old. He had wandered too far out on the rocks during low tide and was cut off when the tide turned. By the time I spotted him, he was barely conscious, clinging to the last exposed rock as waves crashed over him. I don't know where I found the strength, but I managed to reach him and pull him back to shore. His parents were frantic, apparently he had slipped away while they were setting up their picnic. The father called me an angel. The mother couldn't stop crying. The boy said little, but he had the most serious eyes I've ever seen on a child. Before they left, he gave me a piece of blue sea glass he had found. Said it was the reason he'd gone out so far, he thought it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. I told him there would always be more sea glass, but only one of him. Elena's breath caught. The timing, the location, the sea glass, it couldn't be coincidence. She quickly flipped through more pages until she found a follow-up entry. June 20, 1979, received a thank you letter from the Chin family today. Their son Malcolm is recovering well. Mrs. Chin wrote that he now wants to join the Coast Guard when he grows up, to save people like the sea lady saved me. Children form such strong impressions. I hope he finds a safer dream eventually. Elena closed the journal with trembling hands. Malcolm Chin, her Malcolm, had been saved by her grandmother 46 years ago. And now, in some cosmic twist of fate, she had found herself at his lighthouse, pulled from dangerous waters by his hands. The symmetry was too perfect, too poetic to be mere chance. But as she glanced toward the workshop where Malcolm was working late into the night, Elena wondered, did he remember? And if not, should she tell him? For 3 days, Elena carried the knowledge like a smooth stone in her pocket, a secret weight, constantly present yet hidden from view. Several times she nearly told Malcolm, words forming on her lips before courage failed her. How would he react? Would he think she had sought him out deliberately? Would it change the fragile connection forming between them? Meanwhile, Malcolm seemed to be emerging slowly from his shell. He had begun telling her stories about his Coast Guard days, the successful rescues, the camaraderie, the sense of purpose he'd found in saving lives. He never again mentioned the Crestview disaster, but Elena could see how the memory of it shaped him, like water carving channels through stone. On Friday morning, Malcolm's radio crackled to life while they were having breakfast. The Coast Guard was requesting assistance with a search and rescue operation. A small fishing boat with 2 teenagers aboard hadn't returned, and with most units responding to a larger incident further north, they needed local support. I'll prep the boat, Malcolm said immediately, all contemplative calm replaced by focused efficiency. I'm coming with you, Elena stated, already reaching for her jacket. Malcolm gave her a sharp look. This isn't a research expedition. I'm certified in first aid and water rescue, she countered. My university requires it for coastal fieldwork. 4 eyes are better than 2. After a moment's hesitation, Malcolm nodded. Stay close and follow my instructions exactly. The morning unfolded in a blur of gray water and scanning horizons. Malcolm's small but powerful boat cut through choppy waves as they methodically searched the designated quadrant. His transformation was remarkable. The quiet lighthouse keeper had become a commanding presence, coordinating with Coast Guard units via radio while expertly navigating treacherous waters. It was Elena who spotted it first, a flash of orange against dark water. There. 2 o'clock. Malcolm adjusted course immediately. As they drew closer, Elena saw a capsized boat and 2 figures clinging to the hull, waving desperately. One appeared to be supporting the other, who was barely moving. I'll bring us alongside, Malcolm called over the engine noise. Be ready with the rescue line. The rescue itself was textbook perfect, Malcolm maneuvering the boat with precision while Elena secured both teenagers with practiced efficiency. The younger boy was hypothermic but conscious, his older brother had a gash on his leg that had been bleeding steadily. Elena applied pressure to the wound while Malcolm radioed their position and status. We've got them. 2 males, approximately 16 and 14. Younger one hypothermic, elder with significant leg laceration. Returning to shore now. As they headed back, the older teenager looked up at Malcolm with glassy eyes. Knew someone would come, he mumbled. Dad said, lighthouse guy, always watches. Something in Malcolm's expression cracked, just for a moment, before his professional mask returned. Save your strength, son. We'll have you home soon. Later, after the boys had been transferred to waiting ambulances and the Coast Guard had taken their report, Malcolm stood at the edge of the dock, staring out at the sea. The setting sun painted the water in oranges and pinks, deceptively peaceful after the day's drama. Elena approached quietly, standing beside him. You never really left the Coast Guard, did you? Malcolm's voice was soft but steady. Some calls you can't ignore, no matter how much it hurts to answer. Those boys will live because of you, she said. Because of us, he corrected, finally looking at her. His eyes held something new, respect, perhaps, or recognition. In that moment, Elena knew she couldn't keep her grandmother's journal secret any longer. The circle that had begun 46 years ago was completing itself today, and Malcolm deserved to know. Malcolm, she began carefully, there's something I need to show you. Something about Heron Cove, 1979, and a woman named Marisol Reyes. Malcolm's workshop had never felt so quiet. The only sound was the gentle turning of journal pages as he read Marisol's account for the third time, his weathered fingers tracing the elegant handwriting as if trying to absorb the words through his skin. I never knew her name, he finally said, looking up at Elena. All these years, she was just the sea lady in my memory. Elena smiled softly. She would have loved that nickname. I remember the blue sea glass, Malcolm continued, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small leather pouch and carefully tipped its contents into his palm, a single piece of cobalt blue glass, worn smooth by decades of handling rather than ocean waves. I found another piece to give her, but by the time I convinced my parents to take me back to thank her properly, she had moved on to a new research site. Elena's eyes widened. You kept it all this time? Malcolm's gaze met hers, intense and searching. It was my reminder. The day I nearly died taught me how quickly life can change, how one moment of carelessness or one act of courage can alter everything. Is that why you joined the Coast Guard? Elena asked gently. Partly, he admitted. But it was more than that. Your grandmother made me understand that we're all just temporary guardians, of ourselves, each other, this coastline. That stays with you. Elena reached out, hesitantly covering his hand and the sea glass it held. She would be so proud to know what you became. The next morning dawned clear and brilliant, the storm-washed sky a perfect blue. By mutual agreement, they drove to the small coastal cemetery where Marisol Reyes had been laid to rest 5 years earlier. Malcolm brought a sea glass sculpture he had worked on through the night, a perfect miniature rendition of Heron Cove, complete with tiny figures on the rocks. As they stood before the simple headstone, Elena felt a sense of completion, as if pieces long separated were finally rejoining. Hello, Marisol, Malcolm said quietly. I'm sorry it took me 46 years to properly thank you. He placed the sculpture at the base of the headstone, the glass catching sunlight and throwing blue-green reflections across the granite. My grandmother believed there were no coincidences near the ocean, Elena said. She said the tides connect everything, eventually bringing together what belongs together. Malcolm turned to her, his face open in a way she hadn't seen before. And what do you believe, Elena Reyes? I believe that some rescues take longer than others, she replied, taking his hand. And that sometimes, the person you pull from the water ends up saving you right back. As they walked back toward the lighthouse that stood sentinel on the distant headland, their steps fell naturally in sync. Above them, seabirds wheeled and called, and below, waves continued their eternal conversation with the shore, a rhythm as old as time yet new with each moment. Malcolm squeezed her hand gently. I've been thinking about expanding the workshop. There's a grant for veterans using art as therapy. I could teach others. Elena smiled. And I've been offered a long-term research position studying this coastline. I'd need somewhere to live. They paused at the crest of the hill, looking out over the vast expanse of ocean meeting sky at a horizon that seemed both boundary and invitation. The lighthouse has plenty of room, Malcolm said. It was built for keeping watch, after all. And for guiding people home, Elena added softly. Together they continued down the path, toward a future neither had imagined just weeks before, a future where past and present converged like tides, where broken things could be made beautiful, and where two people who understood the true meaning of rescue could finally stop searching. Behind them, sunlight glinted off the blue sea glass at Marisol's grave, one small piece in an endless cycle of loss and return, breaking and healing, that would continue long after their own stories became legends told by the ceaseless waves. Retriclaude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.